Welcome to China Manufacturing Decoded from Sofeast, the podcast where we take you through some of the major topics facing importers and manufacturers in China today. Hi everybody, thanks for joining us again here on China Manufacturing Decoded. It's episode 75. I'm Adrian from Sofeast and I'm joined by our CEO, Renaud. Hi Renaud.
Hey, how you doing? 75 already, huh?
Yes, I know they're going up, and you know what? We're almost at 10,000 downloads, so pretty amazing, no?
Yeah, starting to gather a stable audience. That's nice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I'm glad everyone's enjoying the podcast and is tuning in, and that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to raise awareness.
Yep, and help people. Yep.
Yeah, and so the helping people. I mean, we did make an episode a little while ago, episode 65, if you want to go back and listen to that, where we discussed the different supplier options open to buyers who are sourcing from China. So, you know, that's sourcing agents, it could be companies like Sofeast, but also doing it yourself, essentially. And so following on from that, we started doing a series of episodes where we're trying to give guidance to people who are trying to handle the sourcing process themselves. And in episode 69, we looked at the early stages of sourcing. So that's where to find your potential suppliers, how you verify them, and also how to cultivate backup suppliers if you've, settled on a key first choice supplier. So that's part one. Bearing that in mind, this is part two. So in this particular episode, we're going to explore the terms you need to negotiate with your chosen supplier, now you've got them, how to keep leverage over them, and how to describe what you want at the pre-production stage. Sounds good?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a lot. Let's try to cover that.
Yeah, okay. So jumping straight into it then, starting off with the terms you need to be discussing and negotiating with your suppliers. When we negotiate terms, why do we need to be very prepared and not appear to be too inexperienced?
Well, for a simple reason. Even if this is the first time you're buying products from China, you don't want it to be too obvious when you contact suppliers and you start to discuss with them. It's okay if they see that you don't know much about your product category, even though it would be better if you also knew that. So, do as much research as possible up front. The problem is, let's say you contact 20 different suppliers or 10 different suppliers. You go on Alibaba.com, globalsources.com, madeinchina.com, one of these websites, because these days that's all you have. There's not many ways to find them on trade shows, and you contact them and you send them a message, and then maybe there's 10 of them, and maybe 2 of them might be tempted to give you a very inflated price, or the opposite, to give you a low price to incite you to get to work with them, and then they get your first payment and they disappear. Basically, this is a scam. Okay. And I'm saying 2 out of 10. I'm not sure, right? Nobody really knows. It really depends on the product category, but it's not that far off the mark, because some suppliers are honest with buyers who know how to hold them accountable, and not very honest with the others, right? It's not like black or white. A supplier might be a good supplier to buyer 1, but a bad supplier to buyer 2. Always keep that in mind. So. And then the other ones, let's say 1 or 2 of them are really great suppliers, and which means they have their choice of buyers, and they're probably not very small, and they will see that as these guys are just starting out. I don't really want to work with them. First, their whole economic model might not work. There's a lot of these leads that don't go anywhere. We're just wasting our time. And even if it goes ahead, they're going to give us an order for what, $5,000, $10,000. And then since it's a new company, it might never reach scale. They might fold after 1 year. It's just going to be a big waste of resources on our side. So forget it. Don't talk to them, right? So try not to project this image of the first-time buyer too much, right? Because you might tempt scammers and you might scare away the best suppliers.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, yes. If we go into the sorts of terms that you need to discuss with your supplier in the first meeting you have with them, what are the main terms you'd suggest?
So there's, you need to cover the basics first, right? And if we go through them one by one, and let's pick of course, there's the price, right? But the price is the price. Maybe I should cover it first. If you buy an off-the-shelf product and I don't know, a certain kind of a ceramic mug, let's say, I have that in my hand. So you go on Alibaba.com, you say, okay, I want this kind of ceramic mug, this size, this shape, this color, and so on. And then you look for photos, and then you say, okay, this one will be fine. I contact the supplier, or this one also, I contact the supplier, and so on. And then they will have some prices right there on the website with minimum order quantity. That's obviously the most basic things. And then you can do the calculation yourself and see how many you want to buy, how much money you would need, and how much you would sell on your market. I think you probably don't need my advice on that. It really depends on your market, your business model, and so on. But beyond these two, what are the 6 things that are really important? Let's go through them one by one.
Okay.
First is the lead time. Okay, so if you buy this mug now, how long until you receive it? So how long, how long until they actually start production? How long to get it ready for shipment? And then depending on where they are and how you want to ship, also how long to get it to your country. Now that last point is more for you, to look into maybe with your freight forwarder. But you might want to ask some questions such as, when are you busiest, right? And for example, if you're buying toys and you want them to produce for you in June, you better be one of their best customers, or it's not going to happen, right? Because everybody else is trying to produce in May, June, July, because they want the products on the shelves, ready to be on the shelves end of October, basically. So you need to know when they are busiest, because this will have a huge impact on the lead times. And if they say something very general, like, okay, yeah, you place the order, you send the first payment, and then 45 days later we ship, that's very general. You also need to know when they are busiest. Okay. And the second thing is, you need to try to estimate, if you want some samples, and if you want a little bit of customization to the samples, or a lot of customization, this will impact definitely the time to get to an approved sample, because the more customization means the more rounds of prototyping. And this also, they will usually be super over optimistic about the timelines for that, because they know that they can always blame you. Oh yeah, we sent this to you, but we didn't know you want it perfect, so we had to do it again. Oh, and we sent it, sent it to you, but then you were on holiday, you took 10 days to get back to us, and blah, blah, blah. You're going to have a share of responsibility, so they can always blame you. So they don't really care about that. They tend to be, to promise a lot, and not necessarily over deliver. Okay. You need to keep that in mind. So you need to add a little bit of padding to your internal planning. If they tell you, okay, it's going to be maybe 1 month to get to an approved sample, and then 45 days for that, and then 5 weeks for shipment. Well, these days, if it's sea shipment, don't count for 5 weeks. Maybe count for 9 weeks. That's an example, right? So you need to add some extra padding. Yeah. So that's for the lead time. when we talk about shipping, we also need to confirm the Incoterm, international commerce terms for shipping. It's standardized terms. If you ship by sea, most of the case you want to buy FOB, freight on board. That's the most common. That's the one that gives you control over transportation. You pick your own freight forwarder, your own 3PL company that will manage that for you. Okay, and be wary about suppliers who say we can ship it to CIF. This is tempting these days as shipping is such a headache, but they might work with a freight forwarder, a Chinese freight forwarder that will not charge them the local fees, but in exchange will charge you totally excessive local fees. So keep that in mind, right? After the Incoterms is everything around IP protection, intellectual property protection. If you design your own product, or even if you take one of their existing products, but you make a pretty substantial change. Maybe you work with them to add a very specific functionality. You don't want them to start selling that everywhere around. You don't want them to especially sell it to your competitors or even directly to your customers, right? So this goes back to the non-disclosure, non-use, non-circumvention agreement, plus if there's development work, a development agreement. We covered these in earlier episodes, so I guess no need to go back on that. Maybe we can link to these in the show notes.
I would just add though, you did just write a really great guide to IP protection for importers who are manufacturing in China. So we'll definitely leave the link to that in the show notes as well.
Right. Yeah, thanks for the plug. It's true. Okay, so the next one is transparency about the supply chain. Do you want to have, could be a trading company, could be, a agent, a representative that actually ends up saying, hey, I should be the trader. Or you might work with a real manufacturer, but they won't do anything. Maybe they will just do the packing, right? And then they will act as a screen to prevent you from seeing what's really behind them, where these 2-3 critical operations are done, where the assembly is really done, and so on. And then, for them, it's pretty clear. Since you don't have transparency, number one, it's harder for you to switch because they really have to redevelop everything. They can't go directly to the manufacturer that's doing the hard thing, that the operations are hard to replicate. And number two, you cannot also investigate about the real costs, right? They just see your price and they don't see the prices of what's behind. So they don't know about the margin, right? So that's why it's very tempting in China for the supplier to act as a trading company. Even if they are a real manufacturer, they might just outsource everything. So they are actually a trading company. So if you write something from the start, and this is typically in a manufacturing agreement or OEM agreement or product supply agreement, whatever your lawyer wants to call it, typically, and we covered that in the series about Chinese supplier vetting. Typically, the supplier would vet one manufacturing facility and would specify that only this one facility is approved for manufacturing. Okay, that subcontracting somewhere else is not allowed. And then in case there are 1, 2, 3 critical sub-suppliers, it's also possible to say, the PCB has to come from this guy, the battery comes from this guy, and whatever. And if this is not set yet, you can just say, that you must have transparency into and direct contact into the suppliers of these components. Now, if you're going to buy 1,000 pieces of mugs, you don't care about that, and you're not going to get transparency into where they get the powder to make the ceramic and everything. However, if you are going to buy, coffee machines, and you're actually going to buy, 20,000 pieces with orders growing month over month and so on, you can negotiate. You can negotiate that. It's just a matter of talking to the right suppliers. Okay, so it really depends on the volume. That's where you have more leverage to get to what you want. Okay, and also, access to the manufacturing site also means that you can send your inspectors anytime during production. Number 5 is about the quality standard. So we'll talk about that a little bit later in the episode, from what I understand, based on your plan. But really, you want to have some clarity about your quality standard. So we see some people, they want to buy, I don't know, some kind of nice electronic product that they're developing, and then they say, well, I want it to be finished, just like the Apple products. And we're like, then are you going to come with the same volumes and and the same budget for the engineering before production, or not? Because if not, you can forget about that, and you're not going to push the envelope on manufacturing processes like Apple does. So be realistic. This is just not going to happen. However, if you do a little bit of research and a little bit of thinking, and you say, well, I'm going to buy a mug, I don't want to have any black dots on the outside, anything that's visible from 20 centimeter away. On the inside, I could have a tiny black dot that's visible only under highlighting and only from 20 centimeter away, maximum 0.2 mm in width or whatever, because black dots are just very common with ceramic products. If you do a little bit of research like that, then you can think about that, and you can say it from the start and get the suppliers' reactions. Same thing with packaging. People always forget about that. But to get back to the example of the mug, you don't want the mugs to be shipped in inappropriate packaging, and then whenever a carton is dropped on the floor or whatever, then 3 mugs have the handle broken, or the side chipped a bit, or maybe just they're too much in contact with each other, and there's a lot of damage just because of the transportation and the vibrations in the truck and so on, right? These are the kind of things you need to think of. So that was the quality standard. Number 6 is payment terms. So we already say, of course, you need to think about the price that you want to pay and so on. But how are you going to pay, and when? These are actually critical questions. If you're not going to place a large order, it's very certainly going to be by bank payment or TT. Chinese suppliers, they often say TT. It just means an international bank wire, right? Telegraphic transfer in the old days. That's what it means. So if you do a bank wire, so I saw some suppliers ask for 100% payment, and I saw some inexperienced buyers, but also some buyers that were just extremely confident, even if they had been buying from China for 5 or 10 years. I saw some buyers do that, and it's just nuts. And they think, I show them some goodwill. Yeah, I send you the money in advance. I'm pretty confident about you. We're going to do great things. And then on the supplier side, it's like, oh, look at that. This guy knows nothing. He sent us the money. I mean, professional buyer would never do that. Okay, well, we'll get to his order when we can. But we have these other customers that have a contract with penalties for late shipment, et cetera, and who are really holding us tight. So these guys are going to go first in priority. So the poor guy who sent 100% payment, maybe he has to wait for 5 or 6 months to get his products made and shipped. So be very careful with that. Typically, Chinese suppliers want a first payment of 30%. Sometimes you can negotiate down to 20%, especially if it's not a custom product that they can sell after. Then you could even negotiate maybe 15%, 10%. Because anyway, you're going to make it, but if you don't buy it, they can sell it somewhere else. So the risk is pretty low. And then ideally, they ship the products and they send you the bill of lading. So this is only possible with sea shipments, right? Air shipment is different. Once they have sent to you, they have no way to stop anything. So they need to be 100% paid before shipment by air. In that case, you need to make sure that you have the right to do a final inspection. And if the final inspection is failed, you have to do rework and so on. And then you have to present the products again, and the new inspection will be at their cost. Very, very important. And then you pay them right after. For sea shipment, suppliers try to negotiate for that also, but smart buyers try to negotiate for payment after they receive the after they receive the copy of the bill of lading, meaning that, okay, the supplier has shipped out. And then the supplier can just scan the bill of lading that they get from the forwarder. If it's in FOB terms, the buyer knows that it's true because they can check with their freight forwarder, and then they send the payment, and then the supplier sends the commercial invoice, packing list, and so on, and the original bill of lading by FedEx or DHL to the buyer, who can use that to get the goods out of customs.
Yeah.
This is increasingly hard because of the current crazy shipping situation, with a lot of suppliers that have goods that can't be shipped, that will be shipped maybe in 1 month, 2 months, and it's just killing them, it's killing their cash flow. So right now, as I'm saying this, it's harder than ever to negotiate for that. But, if the supplier agrees maybe that the first time you will pay right after final inspection that's passed before shipment, and then the second time, or starting in after March of 2022 or whatever, they can, they will get paid after shipment. Maybe they can accept that. If you tell them right now is okay, I understand the situation, but you commit right now to switching to the new payment terms from that date. If they confirm it in writing, it will be much easier for you to hold them accountable for that. I covered the most important terms. Always make sure that you get the supplier's written confirmation black and white, very, very clear, and you can reference it. So at the very least in an email, okay, or some kind of letter of intent or whatever that would look a bit more formal. But, talk to your lawyer if you work with a lawyer, that will help. Okay, sure. So I try to cover the main terms here. And I hope that's helpful. So again, the gist of this is be prepared, know what you can ask for, and ask the right questions to the supplier. And before you spend a lot of time talking with the supplier, before you spend a lot of time developing samples and things like that, get their written confirmation that they accept these terms. Because the little game that's always going on is they wait and they say, okay, I will talk to my boss. Oh, this is a bit complicated. We need to talk to a lawyer. Let us see, And then at the same time, they work on pre-production samples that you approve and so on and so forth. And then, you don't want to wait, and then you go into production, but then, they never get back to you and confirm. So be careful about that.
Yeah, and the leverage part is, you've kind of addressed this, because we're talking about the terms you need to negotiate and how to keep leverage over suppliers. So you've kind of already mentioned this in terms of how to organize how you're going to pay them and what's agreed in terms of payment terms. And you've also mentioned, enforceable contracts and getting everything in writing. So I suppose these are some of the key tools that one will use to keep leverage over suppliers and make sure that you retain enough control to be secure, right?
Yes. To keep leverage over suppliers, basically you have legal tools and non-legal tools. Okay. Legal tools, if you can have a legally enforceable contract, enforceable in China, ready to be worked on by a Chinese court. So this usually means the controlling language is Chinese. Calling for litigation in China, because it's much better to call for litigation than arbitration usually if you want them to stop doing something urgently. So if you get all of these ducks in a row nicely, that can help, right? And we're not lawyers, so work with your lawyer on that. And the beauty of it is that you can frighten a Chinese supplier relatively easily if they start to behave in a way that doesn't comply with their contract that they sign and chopped. You can actually work with a lawyer to draft a letter to scare them. Okay. And some people, even to save money, they will actually draft the letter themselves, have it translated, and then talk to a local lawyer somewhere in China, and if possible, not too far away from the supplier, and get them to send the letter on their letterhead. And that's usually enough to really scare a supplier because they're not used to that. In China, it's not something that they are used to. They don't get demand letters from lawyers very often, just because they usually don't work with lawyers. Okay, that's one thing. And just to complement that, if you asked me 10, 15 years ago, I would say, yeah, a lot of them, they will not read the contract, they will not know about the contract, they might be scared by the contract. This is less and less true. Of course, if they're intending to scam you, they will just disappear the minute you send them a contract. If they are a relatively reasonable supplier, they will not. They have gotten more and more used to that, just because buyers found that it's helpful to reduce their risks, and then they're doing it more and more often. So suppliers get used to it. Okay.
And this kind of is related to not having that appearance of being inexperienced. If you organize an enforceable contract with proper penalties and lay out exactly what you expect very, very clearly, potential manufacturer, they're going to think, whoa, these guys are serious.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. If they see that you're prepared and you're working with a lawyer and things like that, they will think, okay, this guy has money to put in that. Because first, he has money to pay the lawyer, right? Especially if it's a US lawyer. That puts you in the category of the probably serious buyer, right? Probably not the guy who's going to give a few small orders and disappear. Okay, it puts you in the category of people who plan ahead and try to have a real business and think of the risks and so on, because these are the kinds of people who are more likely to become sizable customers. Now let's look at the payment tools for that. Okay, so I already mentioned bank wire, TT, as the Chinese often say. So there's a rule, is a very simple rule to understand. As long as you owe money to the supplier, you have some level of control over them. Okay. As soon as you have paid in full, you cannot expect anything anymore from them. Now, a lot of people say, well, they're so dumb. How come it's not their interest? They have to help me build a real good business, and then they will benefit from it, and so on and so forth. And that is true, but only to an extent. And it very, very much depends on the supplier. If you're working with the right suppliers, that is true. If you're working with the average Chinese supplier, that is probably not very true. Why am I saying this? Because there's a number of buyers that keep switching from one supplier to the other just to save a few pennies. And it's not a majority of buyers, but there's a number of buyers like that, right? For promotional items, for very low value goods, and of course it's more prevalent in footwear or garment than it is in advanced B2B electronics, right? However, it does make an impact on Chinese suppliers, and they hate that, and sometimes they get, screwed by the buyer pretty bad. Maybe they spent a lot of engineering resources working on something, and then the buyer just, gets all the information and okay, thank you, bye bye. I had it reverse engineered by another guy who's cheaper than you. Oh, okay. And Chinese business people hate losing like that. In their mind, in their culture, it puts them in the category of stupid. If they talk about it with their friends would kind of mock them. They're, you're stupid. How come you give them that information? You abdicated your control over them. If you do that, you need to control them. You need to hook them in some way, right? And that's the behavior of a lot of Chinese suppliers. Again, not all of them, but that's unfortunately what they end up doing. Okay. Now, having said all that, again, back to the rule. As long as you owe money to them, especially a substantial amount of money, you can ask them to do certain things. If you, for example, there's an inspection and the inspector finds some quality issues and you haven't paid the 70%, well, you can tell them, hey guys, this is not good. I can't pay for these products because I cannot sell them, right? On the other hand, and sometimes they will play games still, because they will say, well, we can sell these products to somebody else if this guy is not reasonable. We don't care about him, right? So they will not do anything. They will say, no, we don't pay for the reinspection fee. We don't agree, and so on. This is especially true if, as the buyer, you don't have, number one, a good quality standard, and we'll get back to that. And number two, some kind of contract to push them to fulfill their obligations, right? If you don't have these two things, this kind of game is much more likely to come up. So try to only wire the remaining, it has to be a substantial amount. Maybe you keep 15%, 20%. It depends on the order, the amount of the total order, of course, but something substantial in your hands that you owe them until you're sure that everything is okay, right? So that's why I see a lot of people who agree on sending 70% before shipment, even though they buy FOB and it's going to be shipped by sea. And, they could maybe negotiate for the remaining 10% after shipment against the bill of lading. That would give them the assurance that the supplier maybe hurries up to ship the goods to get this last 10%. This is just an example, right? So try to think of ways to keep more leverage in your hands until you have confirmed that everything is okay. Because once the goods are shipped out, forget it, it's too late.
Yeah.
If you've paid in full, you don't have another order right now in production or anything, meaning that really you don't owe anything to the supplier. And then you get back to them and say, 30% of the goods are not acceptable. I cannot do anything. Send me you have to do a new production run for free, blah, 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 blah. The answer from the supplier. Really sorry, but really, what? First, are they going to believe you? And it's not easy for them to take a flight and come and see the goods by themselves. And second, they're going to be like, wait a minute, you show us a few photos, but you say 30% of the goods. There's no way we can believe it. Our inspectors did not find that. So they're just going to go through the endless discussions, and then what you might get is a discount, a rebate for the next order. But then, do you want to do a next order with that same supplier who messed up so bad?
Yeah.
And also, if you really get a sizable discount on the next shipment, the next production run, well, they're not going to make money on it. Do you think they're going to do a good job? And what happens when you see that second batch or the next batch is pretty bad? You've already sent the deposit for it. It's just not something you want to get into. You want to avoid this kind of situation up front.
And with the
So,
shipping the way it is now, you don't want to have to
oh,
accept,
oh yeah.
a small amount of okay goods where you've got a lot of defective ones that you can't sell, and then goodness knows how long it's going to take to get any replacements. That's assuming if they're actually going to be okay finally.
Right. Yeah, the current shipping situation makes everything worse, definitely, because it takes longer for you to get the goods and the reproduced goods, and it's more expensive and so on. Things are more often in a hurry. It's just much more expensive for you as the
Mm.
buyer. Okay. The, there's something else I should mention. If tooling is necessary, maybe you make a custom product and some tooling has to be made for example, for the plastic casing or for a extruded aluminum part or whatever.
Mm.
You, if you have a good contract and you accept to pay for 100% of that mold so that you own the mold, then the contract will provide for the option for you to pull it at any time, right? With calling for litigation in the Chinese Court of Justice and calling for what they call injunctive relief in case the supplier does not comply within a certain number of days
Mm.
as specified in the contract. Because if there's tooling, it's just extremely sensitive. Everything is harder. When you tell the supplier, hey, I'm pulling the tooling out, we're going to send a truck, you help us load the mold into the truck and bye
Mm.
bye. It's really showing them the finger. It's really telling them, this is over. Like the relationship is totally over. And then if you don't have something to hold them honest, that's where the really, really ugly kind of behavior happens. I mean, people are really surprised, oh yeah, we ask them for the tooling and they say no. Dude,
Mm.
okay, well, you didn't see that coming. No, I would never imagine that the tooling that we paid and that we own, that they would just keep it, keep it hostage to force us to do production there. But in the buyer's mindset, if the supplier is showing that they are so dishonest, the last thing you want to do is have production done there, because maybe they will mess things up. Maybe they will, buy, for example, if it's plastic injection molding, maybe they will use regrinded material. Maybe they will use a substandard kind of polymer, whatever, right? Um, Everything is possible because you saw their true colors. So
Yeah.
you want to be able to cut the relationship clean, right? That is really, in China, that is really a key aspect of managing the supplier, is always having that option. If you do not have this option, it's much, much harder.
Good point about the
Yeah.
tooling. Yeah.
Mm. And the last thing I'd mention on this topic is letters of credit. It seems to be getting less popular over time, and it's definitely not something that small buyers can use. But if you're gonna place an order for, I don't know, maybe the first order would be $50,000 or more, well, you might be able to find suppliers that accept a payment by letter of credit, and maybe the payment by letter of credit is only for the first one or two batches that you purchase, because anyway it's expensive for you, so you don't necessarily want to do that every time.
Mm.
The enormous advantage of this is that you don't have to send a deposit. I mean, I should not say deposit because Chinese suppliers always say deposit, but I've seldom seen them send it back, even when they should. So it's the
Indeed.
first payment. It's an advance payment, first payment, whatever. Um, and with that first payment, you sort of hooked. Oh well, I already sent that money, so if we don't find a way to keep working together, I lose it. And with a letter of credit, the whole dynamic is much more favorable to the buyer, right? So
Mm.
I don't think I should go deeper into this because it's really not that common these days. But it is definitely possible. And there are definitely suppliers that are savvy enough to say, okay, we'll do with a letter of credit. Okay, but it's very favorable to the buyer. So favorable that most of the suppliers will say no. Mm-hmm. Also, it's not very good for their cash flow, for their cash position. So, they might say no, but not for bad reasons, right?
Yeah, okay, that's clear. I mean, you've written about this before. I will be including plenty of links in the show notes that are related to all the topics we're talking about. So absolutely, if you're listening, you can go and read some stuff about that. So moving on. So we found our supplier. We've negotiated the terms that we need to with them. We've taken action to keep leverage over them to make sure that there's a decent amount of control in our hands as the buyer. Mm-hmm. Finally, we're going ahead with them. But before we go ahead, we need to describe precisely what we want and need from them in the pre-production phase. Okay, so what are the ways you'd recommend to do that, to describe, your product and what you're expecting to receive from the suppliers?
Well, so altogether, that's your quality standard, right? Your requirements, what you actually want to receive and what you don't want. So if you buy some kinds of soft goods, some clothing, for example, or home textile, approved samples will be extremely important, because the touch and feel and the general look of them is extremely important. And they will often come together with measurement tables and, some other documents and like packaging specifications, right? Quite important. But most of the efforts will be on the samples typically. If you buy electromechanical products, it's different. The samples are important, but it's quite important to think of, what are the functionality of the product, what about the safety aspects, what tests should be passed, the aesthetics, try to define certain things. For example, if to get back to the example of product with a custom enclosure, custom casing in plastic that's injection molded at high temperature. Well, they might make a nice prototype with, for example, 3D printing. Okay, plus a little bit of nice finishing to make it look nice, maybe some extra paint or something, and then you approve it as the golden sample, and then they do the tooling is made, and they have some parts out of tooling, and they make final prototypes with that, and then suddenly you have a parting line that's like right in the middle of it, right at the core of the interface with the user, and you're not very happy. Well, you could say the manufacturer, and the people who designed the tooling should have thought about that. But frankly, it's also on the plate of the customer. The customer should think, okay, how is this going to be injection molded? Now what are the typical risks with this this process? Where's the injection gate or gates? Where are they going to be? Where's the parting line going to be, and so on, right? So it's important to think of all this and document it to avoid having bad surprises, right? Now, so as I mentioned, safety tests, function tests, put all this in writing with a description of the test and a required result. But same thing, packaging, always define how it should be protected, how things should be packed in details, and get some photos, maybe get some samples of the packaging materials, especially if there needs to be some custom printing, maybe in color. That's part of the unit packing. Unit packing, if it's going to be like a retail pack, it's part of the product. Frankly, it has to look nice. It's really part of the product. Because it will give the appeal to the product. If the unit pack is broken, then it cannot be sold. So treat it with extremely high attention, right?
Yeah.
And then as you get some pre-production prototypes, take some photos of the problems, and even try to create some defects. Drop it on the floor, create a dent, scratch it, take photos of them, and then say, okay, this would be acceptable. This would be too big. It's not acceptable, right? Very simple, with a tick mark in green or an X mark in red. Very, very important to do that, so that the salesperson at the factory can share it with with the production people and with the engineering people and the quality people without translating it. Super important. Okay. Mm-hmm. Then, so these are your potential defects. And then, if possible, please, put all of that in one or two master sheets. It could be one for the product, one for the packing, or maybe everything for one in one master document. The big mistake people make is that they send some information in WeChat, they approve a sample, they don't really take clear photos of it. They write something in an email, and then 3 months later in another email, but they don't keep one consolidated list of these requirements. And then when the time comes for production, and the people who are going to do your inspections say, okay, so tell us what we should check. Then they're like, yeah, there's no real document. Okay, so the most important is this and this, and they're going to forget things, and it's going to be vague and unspecific. That is extremely common with small companies. That's a trap, because the question is, do you think the manufacturer actually put all of this in one master spec sheet nicely for you to approve, right? Mm-hmm. Usually not. The typical Chinese manufacturer does not do that. And then when there are quality issues, who is to blame? Well, frankly, all parties are to blame. All parties are to blame. That's a question that comes up from time to time. The buyer is to blame because they did not give clear requirements to the supplier. If they don't specify what they expect, then, when the manufacturer did something wrong, who is to blame? and of course, the manufacturer also is to blame, because they did not reconfirm everything as clearly as possible with the buyer. Especially if the manufacturer pretends to be ISO 9001 certified, because then they're basically promising that they have a quality system that conforms to that standard, and that standard makes it very clear. The company should collect the requirements from the customer in a way that's really appropriate. So if they did not do that, if they did not give their purchasing staff, engineering staff, production staff, quality staff, if they did not give them very clear requirements corresponding to the customer's requirement, well, they are at fault, definitely. But again, the buyer is also at fault. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, yourself, Clive, and Max in last week's episode, that would be episode 74, basically said the same thing, didn't you?
Yeah, pretty much. Yes, pretty much. There has to be a lot of communication, and buyers need to know what they require. Otherwise, they have no business buying in China, frankly. You have to do the work of specifying what exactly your requirements are. Because if you pick a supplier that works for, customers that are on another market with other requirements, well, you're going to get something that corresponds to these other requirements at best. You need to start from this assumption.
Okay, well, that's all very clear, Renaud. Thanks. So, yeah, we've gone through now how to sort of get started with your supplier. So that's the terms you need to negotiate, how to keep leverage over them, and why it's so important to really describe clearly what you want, what you're expecting before production starts. So thank you for that. In the next episode of this series, which will be coming in the following weeks, we'll talk about project management, checking quality during production, and verifying product quality before shipment. But in the meantime, please check the show notes for lots of related links. And yeah, thanks for your input and your knowledge, Renaud.
Great. Thanks, Adrian. And we'll be back next week as usual.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, don't forget to like and share, and you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all other places that you get your podcasts from. See you next time.